Good morning. It is the morning after a very close election in Brazil, which sees ex President Lula back on top, winning the elections. It's very clear his government, incoming government, has been recognized by leaders around the world, but shadows hanging over this moment as possibly we face what has been looked at for months as a dread scenario, a very close election in which a losing president won't accept the outcome. Are we facing a dread scenario? That's one of the questions that we want to ask our great panel this morning that includes Michael Fox, a freelance American journalist who's based in Brazil, Fernando Cruz, a Brazilian independent journalist, and Laura Carlson, political analyst from the Mexico program, from the Americas program based in Mexico. Welcome to all of you. Hi, Laura. Hi, Michael. Hi again, Fernando. So, are we facing right now this morning the dread scenario, or are we facing a future of cooperation and a Brazil that comes back together under different leadership? Let me turn that first to you, Fernando. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What is going to happen?
Hi, hello everyone. Nice to be here again. The reports that I'm getting, the conversations that I had with people from the Workers' Party concerns the transition. Right now, the government, Bolsonaro, as we know, didn't say one word, didn't recognize the results about the election, and what people are very concerned now is more about getting in touch with members of the government to negotiate a peaceful and as far as they understand that it can happen a peaceful transition, So they are in touch with the ministries, with people from the most important supporters and people in office to make sure that there is a peaceful and quick transition. What I mean by quick is that they expect people to help, all the people in office to help the new administration, to take place. But so far we're not sure that's going to happen. I think that's the main concern from the Lula's camp,
Can I jump in? I would agree with that. The other question. I mean, obviously, at this point, Bolsonaro, he hasn't recognized anything, hasn't said anything. He's been extremely silent, which he never is silent. And this is the longest that a losing candidate has not recognized the results in the history of Brazil, at least the history of Brazilian democracy. Now, we know that some of his allies came to Brasilia. They were going to meet with him this morning, but we don't know what's come of that. One thing that is interesting is that some of his allies and supporters, including like the head of the lower house, Arthur Lira, came out and made a statement recognizing the results. In fact, he said the democratic will of the Brazilian people needs to be respected. And so that was a very harsh statement. It was a strong statement. We also saw statements from actually interesting Judge Sergio Moro, the former environment minister, and other people who are allies with Bolsonaro, who all said that they recognize the results and whatnot. So I think right now, your question, Ted, where do we look like now? Is this the beginning of some sort of a complicated scenario or a difficult scenario? And we don't really know until Bolsonaro says something. Most likely he is speaking with people in Brasilia. He's politicking, trying to shore up support within Congress and figuring out how many allies he has and figuring out what the next steps are, which of course makes me nervous and likely makes many other people nervous because there has been no word from him. The other thing that we're seeing on the streets is, and it happened starting just after the vote count last night, truckers in at least 5 different states blocking major highways along with protesters. And I think Manuel has a video that he set up that maybe we could just see really fast. If you could cue to that. So what we're watching, this was, oh, there you go. Their sound, it's even better.
Acabou de terminar agora a apuração. O povo brasileiro sabe que sofreu duro golpe e nós não vamos aceitar. O povo está fechando tudo.
So the man there at the camera is saying that the vote count has just closed and we know that we suffered a coup and we're not going to allow this. And so they blocked that rose and he gives the date. That's how come we know that that's legitimate. And this is happening. At least we know that there were roadblocks in at least 5 different states around Brazil as of this morning. The truckers, they had a huge strike back in 2018, and in which they shut down the entire country. Now, they themselves likely do not have enough support to actually shut down the country. That's why we've seen it in specific points, right? In cahoots with protesters, whatnot. And many trucking companies actually have paid their truckers. They're in support of Bolsonaro. They actually paid their truckers to, for instance, turn out on big days in Brasilia and stuff like that. But we don't know how far this could go. I don't think they have enough kind of base amongst the entire trucking community. But historically, the truckers in Brazil are very far right. They're right wing. When I was reporting on them back in 2018, and they were shutting down the country, they had big signs calling for military intervention. And that's what these guys have said too. They're not leaving until the military intervenes. So that's what's happening kind of on the ground. It's not a major issue for concern, but just something to be aware of, not really understanding where that might go. But it is something that's happening kind of in the aftermath, because obviously there is a substantial portion of Bolsonaro supporters that believe there was some sort of fraud in the elections or believe that Bolsonaro should have won.
Yeah. You know, I agree with Michael that these are the points that should be watched now. And I think actually that the fact that Bolsonaro is keeping silent and working on his plan B is probably a good sign. What we thought is that if the election is close, we'll have an uprising. You know, that if it's close, we'll have a situation like Trump, in which he follows the playbook and begins to immediately come out and say that there's been fraud, because he was preparing the train for saying that as well. He was beginning to question the whole voting system before the elections even happened, despite the fact that it's well known as being one of the most efficient and safe voting systems in the world. And so we expected that might happen. And the election, of course, was very close. It was just barely over a point. And yet it didn't happen. And yet there was silence. And so we began to wait, you know, basically, while the rest of the Lula supporters were celebrating. And the scene in Avenida Paulista was, I wish everyone could have been there. It was very joyous. It was very emotional. And it was very sort of personal, and it was quite an outpouring of support and of relief in many ways after 4 years of Bolsonaro. Now, here's why I think that he's not going to mount a challenge to the election results, besides the fact that we haven't seen it so far. And as Michael mentioned, we have seen some of his supporters already coming out in recognition of the vote. Bolsonaro was isolated on the international stage. We already have a statement from the Department of State saying, not only congratulating Lula very early on, but also commenting on free, fair elections in the country. That's a direct message to preempt a right attempt to call the elections fraudulent. And with the international isolation of Bolsonaro, because of his misogyny, his racism, but especially because of being both a climate and a COVID denier, it's very difficult that he would find any resonance for mounting a challenge to this election, even among some of the ultra-right international forces that have been supporting him. So what happens now? We'll wait and see if and when he makes some kind of a statement. But I believe what's happening right now is the plan B. It's the ultra-right with help from Steve Bannon, with the whole structure of financing and sophisticated tactics that's been developed at an international level to get ultra-right candidates into office, will begin to work on destabilization plans. They'll begin immediately to work on pushing the country toward ungovernable status. They'll begin to pull all the levers with the politicians that they have in office, which are a lot in both the Congress and in the governorships throughout the country. And we'll begin to see perhaps isolated events like these blockages. But at this point, those isolated events are probably not centrally coordinated. When you create a movement, a political movement that's based on hate, you can't necessarily control it. And we've seen that. So I think that it's quite possible that most of what we're seeing now are spontaneous uprisings by groups of Bolsonaro supporters who are completely frustrated and disappointed, and that it's not a strategic decision to mount a challenge to the elections.
Okay, I'm back, and I certainly hope that that's the case. That that as people are praying about this, that they discover that God does want a peaceful transition, and that we move in that direction. Because I know there's a lot of people out there, and I did miss a bit, so perhaps this got touched on, but in the Trump scenario, there was a whole after process that allowed there to be intervention points along the way. And is it really quickly the case that because Brazil's elections are so clean and so finished all in a 24-hour period, that there's really no room for a January 6th where the process gets knocked off at some other moment? Does Bolsonaro have moments of opportunity just in terms of where he turns over the keys and that sort of thing? And hopefully with that we can move on. I also want to welcome, in case it didn't happen while I was out, Claudia Martinez, journalist from the Mexican State Broadcasting System. We're really glad to have you with us, Claudia. I know you've been reporting from for a lot of time on this. So if someone wants to grab that question about are there any points of opportunity for Bolsonaro in the future, please have at it.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Well, it has been a very exciting electoral process in Brazil. The 2 weeks ago, a lot of people think that Lula will win, probably Bolsonaro by finally 1.8% of the population. No more than this number. Near that 2 million citizens voted for Bolsonaro and decided the future of Brazil. But remember that the first round, the Congress was defined. Lula will have an opposition, strong opposition in the Congress, and we will see what will happen with his measures of government. Yesterday, in his speech in Paulista Avenue, he talked about poverty, crime, violence, guns, racism, the fight to defend the rights for minorities that, in fact, in Brazil, the most populated groups, Afro, indigenous people, women rights, and a lot of these issues, more than his government support in the two administrations that he has in this country. But I don't know what probably will happen, especially with the silence that we are looking in the Planalto Palace. Bolsonaro, I think that Bolsonaro is explaining his strategy about the result of the election. Probably he will recognize the defeat, but probably he's trying to, I don't know, to strong alliance with politicians here in Brazil, to, I don't know, to implement some kind of fight in some states. That Lula, when Lula won one of these 13 states that bring her the victory to Lula, and let's see what will happen in the transitional process. It will be very,
Flavia,
very.
could I ask you to reflect on just as we know in the recent elections in Colombia, you mentioned the black vote and the indigenous vote, that in Colombia that had a very strong impact on the electoral outcome. Were those same patterns visible in this election?
Well, I think that this is a different scenario. For example, in Colombia, a lot of people is Afro-descendant, especially Francia Marquez, the vice president, is one of the most figures, is the most important figure now in Colombia, in the right for the Afro community, for the right for the women Afro, and from the left wing of the politics. Now, but here in Brazil, it happened an special scenario because more than a half of the population describes itself as Afro-descendant. No, but none of them vote. So it's a special phenomenon that happens here. But finally, Lula da Silva said yesterday in his victory speech that he will fight to defend the right for the indigenous, for the women, for the Afro community, that especially in the Amazon, in the Amazonia region. And I don't think that it will define the vote, define his victory, but of course, it means one step in the politics. For example, we have many cases, many figures, as Monica Francisco, deputy in Rio de Janeiro, and also Thais Ferreira, candidate to deputy also for federal election in Rio de Janeiro, and also many figures here in Sao Paulo that put that step forward for include this community in the politics. So I think it's very, very important to mention that even that they are not the majority, of course, it's one step forward to introduce them in the national scenario of the politics.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
In the what I've heard, the optimism that this election and this choice by the Brazilian people be respected. You've referred a number of times on the panel to the international community and the important role that plays. This is a broadcast in English. We want people in the international community to be listening. And what is the role of people in progressive communities in the United States, in other countries, in Mexico, in terms of supporting Brazil, supporting the democratic project in Brazil going forward? How should we be looking at that? What can we do? For example, saving the Amazon. There's people all over the planet who recognize that Brazil is in control of the lungs of the world, that the Amazon needs special attention. What do people do? How can we get involved in ways that will help and look to a democratic Brazil and a democratic United States, a democratic Mexico? How can we make that one picture? Laura,
if I
can
could
you
jump
take
in.
that?
Sure. I think the main thing is to remain vigilant. Of course, the Brazilian democracy has to be reconstructed now by the Brazilian people, but there are a number of things that's very important. As I said before, that the international community recognized immediately after the official announcement the victory of Lula to, in some ways, preempt any kind of a challenge on the part of Bolsonaro. And so the recognition is a very important part of it. And then later what we're going to see, and you mentioned, Ted, the Amazon, is Lula has committed himself to go after the illegal logging that takes place in the Amazon that was permitted by the Bolsonaro government, and the other incursions into indigenous territory that are happening on a daily basis and represent the loss of acres and acres and acres of Amazon jungle. When he does that, there's going to be pushback, and it's going to be violent. And so to be vigilant on that count and say the world is behind the preservation, the efforts of the Lula government to preserve the Amazon and make sure that he does it as well, is extremely important. And to support a process in which there's no longer impunity for environmental destruction in the country. So mainly it's going to be looking at what's happening on a day-to-day basis with the knowledge that we have now of how the international right operates in the world after the experience with Trump and after seeing electoral victories and a coordinated effort in European countries, Italy, what's happening, the way that the organizations are internationalizing their tactics, their resources, etc., to be very vigilant in terms of noting what kinds of strategies are being applied and to denounce them on an international level as soon as they begin to work to try to undermine the Lula government, which they will. So I think that there's a very big role for people in other countries in terms of that vigilance and solidarity, and for governments in other countries in terms of supporting Lula as he goes after some very powerful and very violent interests. One of the things that happened during the Bolsonaro presidency was that many people were armed, and some actually formed into illegal militias in many places. They have an extreme potential for violence now that could disrupt the government. And so to insist on the rule of law in the country and to support, both judicial and the legal attempts to control some of those renegade forces that are so heavily armed would be extremely important.
And Mike, you traveled in the Amazon recently as part of your coverage of the election. What are you seeing there in terms of the possible role for the international community? I know this is something you've been focused on for years.
Are you on mute, Mike?
I'm on mute. That's me. Sorry, I'm
Mike,
I'm
we can't
going
hear-
for
we
it, and I'm on
can't hear.
mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you
Okay.
fine.
Sorry, we
Okay,
should have
sorry.
alerted you more quickly. We thought it was a internet fade.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm going, go. No, I mean, obviously the situation in the Amazon, like Laura just said, everything that she had just mentioned is great, and it's terribly dire. And 50% of the deforestation that we've seen over the last 4 years under the Bolsonaro government has been on protected lands, indigenous communities, conservation areas. And that is terrifying. We've seen increases just in Yanomami territory up north along the border with Venezuela. There's 20,000 miners there, and wildcat small-scale mining, illegal wildcat small-scale mining increased 50% just over the last year. And it's been increasing like that every single year. So the situation is very bad. Part of the problem right now, and what makes it so complicated, is you now have very powerful groups, like what Laura said, that have the narco traffickers that are now working in conjunction and using massive amounts of resources to just wipe clean areas in just completely deforest areas. So it's a different scenario than what Lula faced back in the 2000s. It's going to be even more complicated, and it is all that more important to put pressure on, to support what he's doing, to really, one of the things that often happens in the international community is that Lula or the Workers' Party, it becomes, particularly from the left, it becomes this question where people start criticizing as though he weren't left enough. And we've seen this time and time again. And we have to understand that he's part of this governing coalition that includes centrist parties. He's going to do everything he can. He's bringing Marina Silva back in there. That was his environment minister, who was extremely important in cutting deforestation rates back in the early 2000s. And she is all on board. He talked last night about getting to deforestation zero deforestation. Now that's next to impossible, but that's the goal. That's where he wants to get to. And so I think the role outside of Brazil is, first off, understanding that this is a complicated, nuanced situation. He's going to do everything he can, but to not criticize within the very first couple of weeks, the first couple of months, oh, Lula should be doing this, he shouldn't be doing that. No, we have to stand in solidarity and not actually critique and attack, the Workers' Party and Lula for what they're trying to implement or what they're going to be trying to implement. That's important. And the second thing is absolutely pressuring the US government, pressuring other governments, pressuring corporations. Let's remember the power that the reason why the Amazon is being deforested, ladies and gentlemen, is because of cows and because of soy. Right? Where is the land? When I was in Caripuna territory just a few weeks ago, why do land grabbers, they move in and they cut down the trees and then they burn them, and then they wipe that area clean and they clean it. They're not even logging on that land before. 4 or 5 years ago, they were logging on Caripuna territory. They're not doing that anymore. They're cleaning it to then sell it as a plot of land so that cattle grazing can move into there, because all of their territory around there, and each state has its own dynamics. In that place, in Rondônia, cattle is very huge. Cattle moves in. Once cattle's been on a piece of land for about 5, 8, 9, 10 years, then soy moves in. And on the drive into Caripuna territory, you pass massive soy farms, international. All of that soy then gets taken to the port, Porto Madeiro, or if you're up in Santarém, massive port. And there's these Cargill terminals where all that soy gets shipped abroad. So it's Cargill, it's massive. Brazil's the largest meat producing company in the world. And they're BlackRock, there's all of these international financial capital that's actually supporting and financing the deforestation of the Amazon. So it's really important to understand where all these layers are at and what we can do as consumers in the United States, but also pushing back at these US companies that are actually helping to deforest the Amazon in very profound ways. I think that's huge. The last thing I'd say very quickly is that Lula yesterday, he said that he is more than willing to accept international support in terms of trying to protect the Amazon. And that's key, because Bolsonaro for the last 4 years has been talking about how the international community wants to rob and steal the Amazon from them, and how they should just, get their hands off the Amazon. So this is a different scenario. Lula's open to the international community. This is where he comes from. He's the great negotiator, right? He's the guy that Obama said he was Okada. He's the man, right? So that's what we're looking at. Things have changed. It's going to be very difficult. And
so
yes,
what is it
we're going to need more pressure from. What's that say?
What is it that we need to pressure this? Should it be, massive investment in giving people other things to do? What's the way out of this? Because it seems like, you have on the one hand, the right telling people, if you want to make a living, this is the only way. We have to grow soy. People in the United States being tricked into thinking that soy was somehow the good drink and was going to like save the planet, because it's green and it's plant-based. We don't have, there's a lot of information that doesn't get back and forth. People, so what is it that people in the North can do? What should we be pressuring? If there's money to be spent, where does it go?
Exactly. So two things. I would just say that, and Lula is very clear about this. There is more than enough land for soy production, and there's more than enough land for cattle, right? So that is important. Just because we don't need the Amazon land. Number two, Amazon Watch has come out consecutively in the last 3 or 4 years with a really important dossier. And it describes and explains the U.S. corporations, the international corporations that are involved in financing what's happening on the ground, financing the deforestation. So pressure needs to happen in those areas, because that's places where in the United States and internationally we can actually push those from within. So I think that there's a layer there that needs to happen, definitely, in terms of identifying these groups they're already identified, but actually putting much more pressure from within the United States in those areas.
I think it's important to question the myth that these kinds of long-term damaging industries are necessary to create jobs and human survival. Many of the communities that are being displaced have survived for millennia in these lands, and they know how to create sustainable forms of survival there. The indigenous peoples, they're not asking for jobs in cattle ranching or in soy production. In fact, what they get from those types of industries that come in obviously is very little, and they help to create this huge gap of inequality that exists, as well as decimating the indigenous peoples. So one has to look very closely at these arguments that employment is necessary because of these industries. And I think holding U.S. corporations accountable is absolutely necessary.
How does all this sound to you, from Brazil? What is international help welcome? Is there going to be a force that will use that, to delegitimate efforts within Brazil? And to what extent, and let's move the conversation a little bit in this direction, is it possible to build alliances with the rest of Latin America to strengthen the position of the Workers' Party and the project that lies ahead?
Who would you like to jump in?
Fernando, please.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thought I didn't get.
I apologize. I
didn't get the question.
Oh, okay, Fernando. The question was, how does the proposals for international solidarity that Michael and Laura were talking about, how does that sound in Brazil? Are there potential obstacles, to that? Will that be a problem? And also the possibilities for Brazil and Lula finding support from other countries in Latin America to further the project.
Well, I think the prospects are very good for Lula, because he's well known as this international leader. Like Michael said, Obama called him the dude. Like in Brazilian, in Portuguese we say o cara, and he's. He I think I'm not sure if he didn't say anything about who's going to be his foreigner minister, the international minister. But if Celso Amorim, who was with him and also with Dilma, if he takes office, we can expect a lot of conversations, and I think all the efforts will be directed to try to get more investors in Brazil.
Uh-huh. And
Sorry.
Fernando, Claudia, the question of a new framework in South America, something like a new UNASUR, is this the way that
Also that.
things could operate? And Fernando, you can also come back to that one as well if you want.
Yes, in fact, there are 4 times within the few days, Saturday and Sunday, when Lula da Silva has referred to this issue. First, when he closed to his campaign in Paulista Avenue, on Saturday, he said on the press conference that he will create a new era in Latin America, stronger, make stronger UNASUR, Mercosur, and then yesterday in the 2 speeches on the International Press Center and after in Paulista Avenue, he said also when he voted in San Fernando the same message, that he will bring back to Brazil to the international scenario and recover his strong in the politics, in the politician scenario, that he will fight versus the inconvenient commercial agreements. Yes, to international commerce, but not unfavored commerce to Brazil, not to manufacture other countries' potencies, but also to make stronger the commerce between Latin America, make stronger Mercosur, and fight with be versus with the war and the inconvenience that have China and the United States. And it's important, for example, for Mexico, because President Andrés Manuel López Obrador is one of the most, if I could say, fans for Lula da Silva. They have met many times, and our president is very happy for this victory. In fact, he congratulates Lula before in the first round. So even that when he was not elected as officially candidate in the victory for the presidency, no. And that happens in the contrary sense with Joe Biden, for example, no. So this is some example for our policy in Mexico, and President Andrés Manuel López Obrador want to create a friendship with Lula da Silva and with Brazil to fight for the values for Latin America, Brazil and Mexico, with Gustavo Petro in Colombia, with Xiomara Castro in Honduras, with Gabriel Boric in Chile, and many other figures in the politics in Latin America.
Thank you. And Laura, it looked like you wanted to say something more on that topic.
What reminded me, his tweet was, "Ganó Lula, bendito pueblo de Brasil," blessed people of Brazil. So he's obviously really happy. And one of the reasons he's so happy is that he has now a very strong ally in what Lopez Obrador has already started to construct or reconstruct, which is the Community of Latin American States and the and Latin American Caribbean States, CELAC, and also a real challenge to the Organization of American States. It's no secret that Lopez Obrador considers Luis Almagro, the head of the Organization of American States, an enemy of the people in Latin America. He accuses him, and there's considerable evidence to back this up. In fact, it's been proven historically of intervening in the right-wing coup in Bolivia. And so the prospect of now having Brazil, the largest economy, fourth largest democracy in the world, as an ally in creating these South-South organizations that can stand up to both U.S. hegemony and to the Organization of American States, where the U.S. exercises that hegemony, has been really, really important to Mexico, to the Mexican government, for its foreign policy.
And Fernando, we're going to let you have the final word on this, but first I want to go to Michael and get your take on the the international picture for Brazil at this key juncture.
Yeah, I mean, everything that I would say is pretty much what everyone else has been talking about. This is huge. I mean, just to look back at what Brazil meant for the pink tide back in the 2000s, Brazil, Lula was never going to be a revolutionary president like, say, Chavez in Venezuela or Ecuador, Correa in Bolivia or Cuba. But what Brazil did was it helped to support all those other places, all those other movements. And I don't mean that with finances. That's the big critique that like the right is always attacking Lula. That's not the point. It's on a geopolitical sphere, on the world stage, and helping to bring people together and giving clout to all these other countries that are so important. And right now we're seeing kind of this renewal, right? Like everybody else has talked about. So really important, lots of potential. I know there's a lot of talk about the potential for a new UNASUR, because that was blocked and stopped by Ecuador and other countries, and everybody pulled out in recent years. And there's a lot of push in direction of try and reform UNASUR. And I know that this is something that it's very exciting. It's very exciting. Remember, just for a second, that when Lula came into power, and I don't just mean regional integration, but international, he opened dozens and dozens of new embassies all over back in the 2000s, including many in Africa, where Brazil had never had embassies in many countries in Africa, although it seems just unfathomable. But this type of South-South relations is going to be really important going forward for Brazil.
That's great. And Fernando, could you bring that all around for us? What are you seeing?
I'm not an expert, on international relations, but I think Michael said, and he pointed out very well, that Brazil has a key role in South America and Latin America, and let's not forget, the BRICS, the bloc that includes China, Russia, India, Brazil, and I think Lula has this phenomenal ability to talk about different subjects that matter to the world, including the environment, and also, he can talk about pacify the world, relating to conflicts like even Russia. So he could be an asset about that. Talking about specifically about the elections and Brazil, which is more of my field, and forgive my English, but I think the main message that Lula said yesterday is drop your weapons. I'm not going to be the president for just half country. I'm going to be the president for all the 200 million Brazilians. So he has this huge mission And one thing is to pacify the country. Another one is that he actually said about, he said he had a very strong statement about that. He has to fight hunger in Brazil. So of course he's going to be talking about the environment and all those subjects that matter to the world. But I think his big challenge now is to tackle hunger. We have this huge gap in Brazil, social gap, and now a lot of people are suffering from that. So that was his, I think, the two key messages. Drop your weapons. I'm going to be your president. I'm going to be speaking to you, to you all, and I'm going to have to address this subject, which is hunger, and it's something that affects all of us Brazilians right now.
Thank you. Well, we're talking about all of this, and just to remind our audience, we're here with Michael Fox, a freelance journalist based in Brazil, Laura Carlson, the director of the Americas program in Mexico, Fernando Cruz, Brazilian independent journalist, and Claudia Martinez, a journalist with the SPR, the Mexican State Broadcasting System. And we're talking about the elections that happened in Brazil yesterday. And we started out the conversation just looking at the immediate scenario that we're in a day after the election. And even though we are looking forward to a new government and that's what we've been talking about in this segment, we're still in that moment of a little bit of doubt as to what will happen in the next 24 hours. So we're waiting to hear. Has anybody heard anything in the last hour while we've been talking? Anything new on that front? Probably not. We're hoping, waiting for the other shoe to drop for Bolsonaro to concede that he has lost the election. But that brings me to something, and maybe we can talk about this in the last minutes of the show, that is this election and is what has happened in Latin America a blow to Trumpism? Those of us in the United States, and I think a lot of the attention on Brazil right now from the United States has been based on the parallels, the frightening parallels that we see between the Trump policies. And Laura, you addressed some of these issues earlier, but is this move? We've seen a number of new governments just in the last 12 months, from Honduras, as Claudia mentioned, Colombia, now Brazil, shift toward a different kind of politics. Does this have any impact in the rest of the hemisphere to the north, the non-Spanish speaking territories of North America? How do you see this in that scenario? And Michael, maybe you can jump into that first, because I know this is a topic that you've talked about a lot.
No, certainly. I mean, absolutely, it has an impact. It is very important. People here in Brazil were watching this, and people in Brazil were watching, for instance, when Trump lost 2 years ago. It's the same thing that happened in Brazil, actually, when Trump won. Then suddenly that was Trump's election, in large part, helped to get the win behind the sail of Jair Bolsonaro. I don't think Bolsonaro would have won if Trump hadn't won there first. And to lose Bolsonaro here, it shows that democracy can win out. It shows that that it is not a definite, head toward fascism, and it's a fascist regime that's going to implement itself. But democracy, people can come together and actually stop that. And so it's extremely important. It's also important what happens in the United States for Brazil. So these connections, comparisons are huge. And look, don't forget, it is not for nothing that Steve Bannon said, I think it was last year, he called this the most important election in the world, this election that we just had yesterday. And in fact, just after the first round, Steve Bannon came out talking about fraud that was in the election, whatever else, during his podcast. And of course, there was no fraud. Not even Bolsonaro was talking about fraud at the time, but Steve Bannon was trying to push that narrative. So he's looking at things from an international world perspective, right? As in terms of the far right movements around. And this is key. Remember that Bolsonaro's son, Eduardo, is the head of Steve Bannon's The Movement in Latin America, right? He's the head of the Latin American movement. And the far right is connected, right? And they want to be more and more connected with the United States and elsewhere. And Bolsonaro is extremely important for all that. So Bolsonaro's loss here, the loss in other countries, is an important setback for the growth of the far right. Now, it's also concerning, you know, Trump continues to be powerful there. You have Trump supporters that are there, concerning, thinking about what that might mean for the United States in a couple of years. It's concerning what it might mean for Brazil in a couple of years. And so hopefully the movements that are generated are enough to really push back and really bring democracy back enough that it kind of puts the fire of fascism out, in terms of a metaphor. But yes, absolutely important.
I really agree with Michael, and I don't want to put a damper on that message of putting the fire of fascism out and the triumph of democracy, because it's certainly true. But I think it is really important that we remember that the international right is playing the long game. You know, they won in Italy, so they lost in Brazil. It's a blow. It's without a doubt a blow, but they're not going to go away. And it doesn't mean that on an international level, they're significantly weakened, because they have a whole bag of dirty tricks that they're going to pull out as Lula begins to try to govern. And they're also working in many other parts of the world. It's really time that the US left understand these connections better. I think that after years of being a foreign policy analyst here in Latin America, it's always kind of a battle. It's to say there's a domestic anti-gun movement, for example, and you say, but wait, it's linked to what's happening to us here in Mexico. Those producers are producing the arms and pushing them on cartels here. Or there's an for the anti-racism movement to say, look, there's links on an international level. The right is extremely linked up and organized and consolidated on an international level, and it's time that we were too.
Well, along those lines, maybe I'll just, remind people who are listening that on February 24th, there's going to be a peace summit in Mexico City to discuss these issues on an international basis. And I encourage you to look that up, Peace Summit 2022. It will be in Mexico City on February 24th. So I'm just going to put in that advertisement. I hadn't planned to, but it seems like something that we should really talk about, because exactly the kind of issues that you're talking about, us needing to bring together and work together on, Laura, from climate to guns to immigration justice. These are all things that affect us, throughout the hemisphere. And Fernando, I wanted to ask you in this same regard, if you think that people in Brazil are kind of aware of how the American right is operating, because I think it's confusing sometimes outside the country, because, the United States has usually been seen as, the nefarious agent with the CIA operating, to undermine democracy. And it's a little bit different now. It's coming from a different place and a different, aspect within our society. And is that understanding of what Steve Bannon is up to and the bag of dirty tricks that Laura is describing, are those things visible to Brazilians? Do they understand what's coming at them?
Well, it depends on whatever you say. Brazilians as people who understand politics and all these movements we're talking about. I think the average people, they have no idea what you're talking about. But yeah, in Brazil we have the thinkers in the left wingers. They've been thinking about that a lot, and I don't think the battle's definitely not over. I think we're very aware of the challenge ahead of us. Lula winning the election is just one step, and it's a huge step, of course. But I think we're very aware of the challenge that we're facing right now in Brazil. Look at our Congress. look at the people we elected, you know, for you know, in Brasilia, we have you know, Damares elected as senator. So I think, yeah, it's a huge challenge, and I think we're gonna have to deal with the effects of what Steve Bannon means to Latin America for a long time, for maybe decades ahead, you know. And I don't know what's going on, or what will happen in the future, seriously, because what these people did over the past 10 years, over the last decade in Brazil, it just, you know, the damage was so huge, the impact was so big, and I think we're going to be talking about this for the past for the next 20 to 30 years ahead of us, and I don't think Lula is going to be. I think if we're lucky, Lula is going to be part of this a transitional period where hopefully we can go ahead, you know, and move on from where we are now. I'm sorry.
Well,
I hope
no,
thank
you for that. Thank you for that, Fernando. And I, you know, I know that we need to keep talking and will keep talking for a very long time. And I know that we've been talking here for a good while now. We started late, so I know that those of you who are on the call now need to jump off. We've already lost Mike Fox. We'll talk to him again, and we look forward to talking to all of you again. Laura Carlson, Fernando Cruz, Claudia Martinez, thank you so much for being with us today, and carry on with your good work.
Thanks to Global Exchange and 360 Peninsula 360 Press too for the opportunity to be here.
You are most welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much to be a very strong group of media that allow us to live this new process and this new future for Brazil. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Claudia.
Thank you.
Bye, so Fernando. Much. Bye, Laura. Till next time.
See you.